Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. Today's show features Francisco Dean, who's at the music department at the University of Chicago Lab School. And we connected over a project he did for the Holocaust Remembrance with his Jewish Student Association. And they did this incredible project that we're going to talk about using artifacts from the Holocaust to create sounds. It's a beautiful piece of work. We're going to have links in it, right? We can put links into the show notes. Good. I just make sure that's true. And it's really just such a cool way and very respectful way to pay homage to the people involved. So, as an educator myself, I'm really happy to talk to him about this like real world project. You know, so much school is make believe, and this is like a real thing that they're doing. Francisco, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'm a longtime fan, Brian. I want to say really quick, oftentimes my commute to and from work will allow me to get in either most or all of an entire episode. And episode 241, as I'm thinking about it, where you were talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect, that was really applicable to, I also teach the jazz band at my school. And, you know, one of those things that we talk about is that whole layer thing of just like what you know and what you don't know and what you don't know, you don't know. And so, yeah, I'm going to steal some of those kibbles, man, because that was some good stuff. I appreciated that one especially.
That's great to hear. Yeah. I'm really happy that you listen and yeah, that's so true. The whole idea, like, you know, when we first start things, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know all the problems we're going to run into. And I think in my life, that's what's gotten me started on so many things that I didn't know. So I didn't, you know, overthink it. I just went in. And then much to my surprise, you know, it got a little more complicated. But by then you're already in it. So it's one of the blessings of kind of being, you know, ignorant of what you're getting involved in.
For sure. That was my gateway into just teaching music technology in the first place. The school I'm at now, the lab school, this was the first place where there was an actual course that had already been established with electronic music. And I've used technology all the time. I use notation software, Finale. With the jazz kids, we'll use Band in a Box, you know, some accompaniment type stuff. So no stranger to technology, but the production side of things was kind of new for me. And so getting my head wrapped around what that was like from a teacher perspective, going to some of the trade school classes that I went to, that was a whole lot of you don't know what you don't know. And in some ways it was, you know, a little overwhelming at first, but I met some really good people and had a really good support system. And so, you know, hindsight looking back at all of that, it was real organic, but, you know, here we are. This is 12 years later and still plugging away at it.
Wow. So 12 years ago, your schools were doing that stuff. That's great.
Yeah, they had the class itself had been there, I don't know how long, several years before I got there. And I think at the time they were using Digital Performer, which was exclusively Mac, as people might know if they used that DAW. And just trying to figure out how that could be more accessible for kids who were, you know, Windows-based. So I started off with Cubase because they had at the time a teacher resource pack. So I thought, okay, lesson plans and, you know, someone kind of hold my hand through this and give me some steps. We used that for about a year. Maybe it was 2. I can't quite remember, but there were always rumblings in the student circles of Ableton. I kept hearing that come up all the time. And, you know, one day I just Googled it. And it turns out that there were some classes here in Chicago, kind of a, you know, night weekend kind of thing. And that's where I really dove into it. So, realizing how versatile, at least for me, for what I wanted to do creatively, that was a good fit. I know DAW is a very personal decision for producers, as you know, you have a certain thing you're trying to do and how you want to do it. That was a perfect marriage for me. And I'll just say also that, you know, in hindsight, I don't work for the company. I'm not endorsed. I'm not a certified trainer, but that company for me is so invested in education and so invested in schools, more than I've ever seen any other corporation. And I really have appreciated that partnership. I've given some clinics at teacher educator conferences, just talking about how I use what I do, but Ableton's kind of the flagship of all of that. So that to me was a really a pleasant surprise to, find a tool that you really like, but then also at the same time realize that the company who was producing that tool, really good dialogue. I mean, I've met so many great people through that. So all of that was great for me.
Yeah, I had similar experiences. I was using Digital Performer for a little while too. I started with Pro Tools because that was all I knew. That's like Kleenex or Xerox, So that's what I got. I wound up on Digital Performer for a little while. Logic came along. I liked that too. But it was all of the stuff from the community around Ableton Live. When I'm doing my YouTube searches for tutorials, I keep getting how to use a compressor, how to EQ in Ableton Live. So eventually it pulled me in too. And the commitment to education has been spectacular. At my school where I teach, they donated 30 or 40 pushes. And when they released the second push, they did this great incentive where they gave out, I don't even know how many, it must have been thousands.
Yeah, my school was part of that too. We benefited from that as well. Yeah,
so it's so hard to break tradition, right? And so many music departments are very traditional, and for good reason. But I think they've really made it a lot easier for educators to get involved in some of the newer stuff that's happening that the kids are really into.
One of the things that I've realized is, and it's interesting, Thomas Falds, who's one of the certified trainers, he's our area Ableton rep.
Yeah, I know Thomas.
We're having conversations. Yeah. I've realized that over the years, I use Ableton in every single class I teach, even the ones that have nothing to do whatsoever with production. Like on occasion, we'll teach a music appreciation class, and so there's things I use Ableton for in there. There's things in my jazz ensemble. We do rhythm section camps over the summer where I can load multi-sessions, multi-tracks, and I can, solo the bass line, or I can, group the bass and drums just so we hear what their relationship. There's, endless things that I've just stumbled on and discovered. And again, it's like the gift that keeps on giving from me, because every class I teach, no matter what the subject area is, it's mind-blowing to me that I've found a legit purpose that Ableton can help enhance, what that work is all about.
That's great. Let me ask you, what is your musical background? How you got into education, and then as you kind of sounded like you stumbled into the production aspect of everything a little bit. So I love hearing how our unlikely paths bring us to where we are.
Well, I had two unlikely moments, and I'm 100% transparent with the kids. I don't hide this. So before I get to that one, just in general, growing up in high school, I was really I was always into music, wanted to play an instrument. I played the French horn in my high school band, middle school band. At one point, dabbled a little bit in trumpet, and then later on that became my primary horn. But I was really into composing. And when I graduated high school and was looking for schools, I wanted to be a composition major. And I remember my high school band director just, forcing it down my throat. You got to major in education, and I'm like, I see what he has to deal with that has nothing to do with music, and I'm just not in, there's, at a young age, you can see the politics and you can see the bureaucracy, and I just wanted to create. I didn't want to do any of that. Well, he had a big magnetic pull, and I remember, he talked me into doing it. I entered, at the time it was Southwest Texas State University. Now it's Texas State in San Marcos, Texas. I was a music ed major, and I was just kind of doing it. And I remember along the way to, make ends meet, I was doing a part-time job at a grocery store, and then the area high school was looking for some college teachers to do some private lessons. And so that was, a little better pay for something that I was more interested in doing than bagging groceries. And so I started working with some high school kids. And the funny thing about that was that's where it hit me. I remember this trombone kid. I wish I could think of his name. It was Lockhart High School in Lockhart, Texas. And this kid was just trying and trying and trying and trying and just couldn't get it. But this kid had so much fight in him and spirit in him. And I remember there was a day where all of a sudden it just clicked for him, and he understood it, and he was able to do it. And I just remember I'm getting goosebumps right now. I remember the look on his face when he actually got it. And I just remember having this unexpected high from that, and that I had something to do with that. And to see him just feel in that moment kind of liberated. And it was funny because from that moment on, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do music ed. And the cool thing was I was already on that path. So all the work I had done was already, relevant and going to be relevant. But that's the point where I really had buy-in. And so that was great. And I don't think that was expected. But one thing I discovered was that teachers can still compose, so I was still able to write. Teachers still play and perform. So I was able to play my horn at whatever capacity I wanted to do. So I never had to give up any of those other things to stay in the classroom and work with kids. And it's interesting when you ask your average garden variety music teacher what your primary instrument is, right? So somebody might say it's the saxophone or the trumpet or, piano. And for years, if you ask me that question, my response is my instrument is the classroom. I realized that I literally go home and I practice and I shed how kids learn the way somebody else sheds, lip slurs or scale studies or, digital patterns when they're trying to do, jazz improv. I mean, I do those things too, but clearly for me, everything is really centered around how am I going to get kids to understand this better and kind of unlock some stuff. So, that's kind of where all that started. But then fast forward to, so this would have been, I guess, year 14 in my career. This is my 22nd total right now, but I think year 14 is when I moved from Texas up to Chicago. And so after a year at a school in one of the suburbs, this lab school gig became open. They were looking for somebody with a jazz background, which I had just done a master's degree at IU in Indiana University in Bloomington in jazz studies. So that was a good fit. But one of the classes was this electronic music class, and I'd never taught a class like that before. But, a gig is a gig. And I remember very clear, and this is the part that I freely tell the kids. I don't hide this at all. I told them, I said, when I first got into this, I had zero respect for this activity. As a jazz musician who, really revels in the whole human interaction and the playing off of each other and improvisation in that musical ensemble community that can be really spontaneous. The notion to me at that time that one person could sit at a computer and with mouse clicks just create this entire body of work and hit a space bar to trigger the playback of it. To me, I had, that was just so opposite of everything I had ever, experienced. And I was teaching the class and I was giving them, the best experience I could, but just internally, personally, it was just something that I really wasn't into. And I think, like all things, you realize that there are hacks in every line of work. And it wasn't until I began to meet other people who were producers and DJs and, you know, people that just integrated technology into their art, that I really saw there was a lot more legitimacy in what they were doing. Especially the whole sound design piece of it, right? It wasn't just someone browsing some preset library. It was people who were really getting inside frequencies and sculpting things, or, you know, DJs at a club. I mean, it wasn't just hitting a space bar. It was the spontaneous transition between one song to another, beat matching, key matching, in real time monitoring the dance floor to manipulate how people are having a good time. I mean, all of that to me all of a sudden was just mind blowing, how this underworld, and I call it underworld because in schools, this is still a very, you know, developing thing. I just began to have incredible respect for this. And it's ironic now that 12 years later teaching this class, this is the peak of my day. This is the thing that I love the absolute most. I take this home and I nerd out to just exploring, creating on my own. It's a rabbit hole because technology is always evolving. And so to be able to be in a place where I can teach kids and show them things, but from my own personal gratification, have my own journey of exploring things, that to me, it's just interesting to me how all that came full circle. I didn't want to teach, and I didn't want to do music technology. And now those are the two things that I've just loved as part of my career.
Isn't that funny, right? And embedded in that, I think, is a great lesson for your students of how you need to keep an open mind. And you do. You know, things on the surface, you know, when you first see it, or you're just seeing the surface, you're not really seeing how deep it goes. Yeah. And I think I had similar feelings about probably like electronic music in general, coming from like playing guitar in rock bands. Not that we were doing anything complicated. We were mostly 3-chord songs and stuff, but we were really playing, you know, and that was like a big thing. And so I had, especially as a teenager, I had these things like, I don't like music with drum machines. Meanwhile, looking back, I realized that a lot of the music I did listen to had drum machines and synthesizers in it anyway. I just didn't know. But
well, they were slick about it.
Yeah, well, yeah, it just was naive, you know. And it took time. It took like exploring it and realizing, you know, like things. There's definitely like this kind of conception that once the computer comes out, it kind of does all the work for you. And you can auto-tune it, you can quantize it, but there's still like so much art that goes into all of that stuff as you start digging in a little bit. And now I'm totally different in my thinking, where I see everything as like a valid tool to do your art. It's just another tool.
Well, I think the tool piece of it is the important piece, because you can get tricked into just having something perform a function for you, and then that separates you and disconnects you from the you know, the art and the meaningfulness. But if you're looking at it as a way that can enhance, like, okay, so for a while, just as a, you know, gimmicky kind of thing, I used to dabble with horn effects, just because it was really more of like a way to like practice without disturbing, you know, the neighbors. That silent brass, it's somewhere over here. But I've just been really, like, I would say the last maybe year or two, really getting into artists who are like legit integrating that. So like Kwang Vu and Stomu Takeshi and some of the later Terrence Blanchard stuff, Nicholas Payton. And so as of this morning, it just came in the mail today, this piezo pickup for my trumpet. I'm gonna, I've taken the plunge, just really getting inspired with what, you know, landscapes you can create beyond just the acoustic sound of the horn. And again, you know, I'm not wanting it to be gimmicky. You can run your trumpet through some distortion stuff and it sounds like a guitar. Well, there's already guitars that have been doing that forever. Why do I need to do? I'm curious about what the sound of the trumpet can do, in the space of electronics where I won't be able to do that acoustically. And so that to me is like this new, there's always a new chapter. And so that's what this has been the last, several weeks. So I'm excited about that too.
No, that sounds like fun. So after this call, I bet you're going to be having a grand old time experimenting. Very cool. You have to let me know how it goes.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's a really great thing that you're giving your students with that kind of honesty too. Even about teaching, I was similar to you. I was doing English and not really knowing why or where I was going with that. So I went into teaching because that's what you do. And my whole fear the whole time was, what if I don't like it? Because you don't get into the classroom until you've already gone through so much.
Yeah, that's right.
So I tell my students that too. Like, this wasn't my dream. I wasn't one of those kids when I was like 10 years old. I had it all figured out. I joke with them like, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. But it worked out for me, in that way. I think I got lucky. But it's a good lesson too. Just sometimes you have to try things out, Even music was that for me. I mean, I wasn't around a lot of musicians, and it wasn't until a friend of mine was playing guitar that I realized, we could play guitar. We could do that after we're done with Nintendo, and
sure,
it just opened up the whole world. You don't know what it's going to be, and I think if you would have asked me if I would be interested in playing music, I would have been like, nah, I got baseball and Nintendo is enough for me, and it just wasn't in my universe. I love that that full circle idea about especially like as a jazz musician, that's I guess it's like I almost see it. It's a little culty, right? It can definitely be. Like
sure.
There's a lot of pride in it, of course, because it's some incredible playing in music, but
yeah.
To have like the assistance of computers and other tools, that's always been frowned upon. Even if you go back to Bob Dylan pulling out an electric guitar, he got booed for that.
Sure. So, one of the things that I thought of as I was trying to just rationalize my universe of, being this traditional ensemble kind of musician and then incorporating and embracing the technology piece of it, was all of the ways that I could still keep those worlds together. Like I didn't want to have to abandon one for the other. And I think to that end, which, what we're, talking about today, this piece, before we even get into the piece itself, the fact that I wanted to create an electronic ensemble, period. To me, I was just convinced that you don't have to lose the sense of community and ensemble playing, listening to each other, interacting with each other, responding to each other. The only difference is the sound palette. How do you reinvent the sound of the violin or the trumpet? Well, we're using different sounds and we're controlling them in different ways, but everyone in the ensemble still has a part that's assigned to them. And some of that is, predetermined. And some of it is improvised. Like there's space from year to year as we've had that ensemble and we've prepared and performed various pieces. The thing that's been really gratifying for me is that I never had to give any of that up. In fact, I'd have just added more to the plate of stuff to experience. So that to me was like, it's proof. I think I needed that for myself to just validate that there were a lot of misconceptions when I first got into this, and challenging those to try to find something that was authentically meaningful. This ensemble for me at the school and the kids who have been a part of that has been so much fun. So much fun.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. What got me into all this was recording. So, as I'm starting out, I'm getting my 4-track tape recorder and working my way up. But while I'm now getting into like the computer, it's like, oh, there's like synthesizers in here. Let's see what I can do with that. Let's see what I can do with this.
Yeah.
And then as I'm learning, I start to see people performing live electronic music. And to me, that was like, that doesn't go together. Live and electronic music. It's programmed, it's pre-recorded or something. And to start to see that it was possible opened everything up for me. And as a songwriter, as a musician, and then to do it with other people where, as you said, you kind of take on certain roles as if I was the drummer now. I'm the bass player.
Right.
I'm doing these elements. It was just so exciting that my guitar gathered a lot of dust for a few years. I'm at a point now where I've like, it's all coming together. It's really fun for me.
Yes.
And
Same
it
here,
sounds
man.
like you are too with that piezo pickup. And
Well, and the nice thing about the ensemble, at least from a teacher's perspective, is that I can still teach musicianship.
right,
There, in some ways, I think it's even heightened because there was one piece that it was the very first year that we had the ensemble several years back. One of the pieces, I think the time signature it was something really, it ended up being 4/4 for, I think, I don't know, maybe 3 bars. And then there was a bar of 3/4. But the way you had to program that was 1 bar of like 17/4. So it was this really weird asymmetric thing. But because some of that involved loops in addition to organic playing, like I remember we had a MIDI interface and everybody was synced into a clock. And so like when you started that BPM, you had to follow it. And so that sense of musicianship in terms of following this pulse and this part that you have to play live in combination with those things that are already synced, counting and rhythm and subdivision. And so in some ways, to a heightened degree, that was really exciting that I didn't have to give up the actual music education piece of this. It was just a different way that it had a different flavor to it. So I still get to teach music and musicianship in a performing context and develop kids' skills through technology. So that's another thing that was really great for me to discover and realize.
I would say the same is true for me. I mean, my understanding of music theory grew a lot through doing it, with the computer and performing live with, especially Ableton Live. Time signatures that I couldn't really count out myself, that I could program in that and then start to get a feel for it. I think the spot that has really hit the mark, though, for me are just like a lot of the modes. For me, growing up playing guitar, the modes of major were just the major scale. I didn't understand the point. Why am I playing in Dorian? It's just like the major scale in a different way. So I couldn't grasp it. I didn't see the point, I guess. But once I started sequencing stuff within those scales and understanding it in that, it just, it opened the door so much. Really, I think you stumble into it in a different way, I guess.
Yeah. And reverse engineer, like, from a producer standpoint, if you are programming something and you don't 100% understand or comprehend it yet, but you're able to execute it. And I tell the kids all the time, because they get really caught up in their skill set. They're still learning the basics and developing the basics. And so, they're writing drum parts and they're not drummers. They're writing bass lines and they're not bass players. And so they get really caught up in that. And one of the things I tell them is that no matter what, the one thing that you do have is your own sense of taste. You know what you like and what you don't like. You know what sounds good to you and what doesn't sound good to you. So like in the sense that you're talking about, where programming something and then having it executed, if that connects with you and you discover this is something that you really like, okay, so now you can lift up the hood and discover why you like that. Maybe there's a certain combination of parts, this counterpoint between what the drums or the melody is doing, or maybe there's a chord progression in there that you just stumbled on that sounds good to you, but now you want to understand why you like it, because that does inform what mode you might write your melody in. You know, all of those things, I think at one point or another, if you allow it to, I think it can come full circle. And so we get so caught up in the textbook thing, you know, chapter 1, chapter 2. Well, maybe it's chapter 20 for you. That's first. And then it's chapter 19 and 18, and you're working backwards to reverse engineer this thing that you organically created that you're so into, so that later on you can have more ownership of what you do as your next project.
Yeah. I think from doing this with my students, you can kind of give them the fun part first. Whereas I think with an instrument, there's no getting around like the technical stuff, the actual physical technique of playing, and that's enough to make people not want to do it. You know, I know when I started playing guitar, how bad my fingertips hurt, and whenever I show somebody how to do something on guitar, they're like, "Oh my God, it hurts! Like I can't do this." It's like this is the hardest part, though. Once you get past this, but with my music production club at school, I can be like, here, this is how you make a beat. And they're making a beat, and they're like, oh my God, it's a beat. And they're having fun. They don't even know what bars and quarter notes are. They don't need to know that yet. And then the technical things start to come out of curiosity and not just because you need the foundation first.
One of the things that I've always, this is a goal for me, and who knows if I'll ever be able to accomplish it. You know, in the music production / technology circles, the one term that's kryptonite for people, it makes them run for the hills, is music theory. And I so wish there was another way that we could coin that so that it didn't run people off. You know, I look on social media all the time, and there are all of these ads for, you know, this chord progression creator, or this beat creator, or this melody creator, or like, you know, instant track. And, you know, people go to that as their destination. It's like, I don't know how to do this, and so this app can do it for me, and now I can put my name on it because it's, you know, public domain. But then if you try to show people, you know, let me break this down for you in a way that's not so, you know, terrible, like, you know, the whole green eggs and ham kind of thing. I mean, music theory doesn't have to mean Bach and Mozart and Beethoven and taking you 4 years before you can compose your first piece. That to me is one of the things where, like you said, there's no getting around some of this. You do need to have some understanding of the mechanics, because you're a songwriter. You're creating drums, bass, harmony, and melody parts, and you do need to understand what they are and how they work together. But trying to just find another way to coin that phrase would be mind-blowing, because it's the first place where people start running for the hills. And it's like, you know, it's funny, we talk about this. So on those same social media pages, I've done this every time, and I've never had a single person take me up on it. If I get irritated enough, I'll actually chime in on one of those, and I'll just, you know, do my little soapbox about how it'd be really cool if you would learn that. And in that response to total strangers, I offer to show them for free.
Wow.
I say, just send me a personal message. If you are curious about this, I will be happy to do a Zoom call with you or whatever, and just, you know, find out what you're trying to do, help you understand that. I've never had a single person take me up on that. And it just kind of seals the deal about where this apprehension is. I don't know.
It's scary. It
is.
Sounds scary. And because, too, it goes forever deep. It just doesn't ever end. There's no bottom to it.
It's a rabbit hole for sure.
You know, and it's intimidating. And it's nice that the tools are great. You know, sometimes I like them myself just for doing things I wouldn't normally do, little surprises and stuff. But I like your thinking that maybe we need like a different term to just kind of sneak it in, you know, like stick the medicine inside a little piece of hot dog.
It's got so many classical implications because of how long we've used that term that people go straight to that assumption that you have to be this classically
now
trained.
we're reading music and we're looking at charts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, okay, my digital classes, I run those as if, so I run them with the assumption that no one in the class reads any music. I don't use any staff paper, although I am an actual classically trained musician who reads and counts. There are other ways to develop those musical skills beyond the actual sheet music. Now, the kids who do read, sure, if you want to add that in as a way to enhance what you're doing. But, I mean, we've discovered success with these kids understanding the nuts and bolts and being able to organically create without the need of the staff paper itself, while still understanding the notes of the piano keyboard and the principle of a scale or a chord or interval. So, yeah, it doesn't have to be that way.
No. Well, I started playing guitar in 9th grade, and guitar is a good instrument for circumventing theory because you can learn power chords and, you know, just
Sure.
a couple, put your fingers here, then move them here kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when I was in 7th grade, there was a general music class we all had to take, and I hated it. And it's so funny to me looking back because I feel like I was this like ripe fruit for the picking. Like just about a year and change later, I was going to have this total change in my life where all of a sudden music is everything. And it was a turnoff, you know, so much.
Do you think it was the delivery system of that class that turned you off? What do you think it was?
Yeah, it was just, we weren't playing music, first of all. So we weren't, it was like all of the work and none of the fun kind of thing.
Sure. Sure.
And, you know, we were learning like duple and triple meter, I remember was like the thing. And I couldn't wrap my head around it. I didn't understand what they meant by counting or any of this stuff. You know, I'd listened to music. I liked music, but it just, to me, it wasn't the same thing as what I listened to. It was like this, it might as well have been like a whole other thing.
Yeah.
It didn't have anything in common with music I liked. So maybe if that connection was made, and that's the nice thing that I find you can do with production is you can have people learning this stuff while they create the kinds of music they like to listen to.
Yeah. I try to incorporate that more because I realize in my own curriculum that if I'm not careful, it can have this front-loading effect of being purely academic. I divide it up into 3 categories. Technical stuff, which is understanding the software, the DOS, or in our case, Ableton. You know, what tools do what within Ableton. And then the theory side of things, you know, understanding intervals and building scales and chords and chord progressions. And then the third one is songwriting, you know, the actual how do we write for these things. Well, all of that can be really academic and front load for a very long time before kids can actually get in and do it. And so, you know, over the years, I've tried to inject one thing and then immediately go into like where their hands on exploring that and doing that and creating that. Like we just finished a unit on drums this past week. And next week when we come back, we're going to have a little show and tell. Everyone created a couple of drum beats and we're going to just check them out with each other. And then we get into chord progressions. But at every step of the way, I'm trying to pause for a minute so they can just, I call it playground. When they come in and we have playground days, they know that no new material. It's whatever we've already covered. Here's time for you to just get hands-on and explore that and develop a connection with it. Because I think part of the issue is if they don't interface with it enough, those skills, you can understand them, but they get rusty. Yeah. And then when you want to go back, you have a creative idea and you want to just get the idea out, the technology is a barrier because what was that mouse click or where was that tool? And you know, having to look that up and how time consuming that can be. So it is a juggling act, to be sure, because kids come in this class and they don't understand any of that. They're walking in the first day of school to make beats and they don't understand what that means when they say that, but they know they want to do it. And so how do I try to figure out a way to get them to that as quickly as possible while still getting all of these essential things they need to really have ownership of what they create? That to me is, you know, the constant goal, I guess, is to make sure we keep all that in fair play.
Are you college age students, or is it younger too?
These are high school.
They are high school. Okay, yeah, I was starting to get the.
Yeah, these are high school.
I just assumed university, so.
Yeah, so we're a K12 school that's owned by the university. So okay. I think way back, I think this year is the school's 125th anniversary. Way back, my understanding is that the school existed as a way for university education majors to get some hands-on experience working with kids. But since then, the school has just exploded into this fully, robust K through 12. So we have, elementary school, we have middle school, we have high school. Yeah, so I'm part of the high school division, and so I teach all these classes to high school kids.
Okay, so that might explain why I felt like your students in the video looked so young. I was thinking like, oh man, I'm really like getting old because I'm distanced from the college-age kids. They look like children. But okay, cool.
No.
That's awesome. I love the idea of playground time, just a chance to kind of explore some of that stuff. Because that's I think where all the connections get made. They start to see how it applies to themselves and what they want to do.
I hope they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my hope.
Yeah, it's nice to incorporate that instead of just moving on before they kind of had a chance to have their fun with it. I think that's a problem with a lot of people that are learning, and I know I went through this myself, is that you're learning this thing, that thing, this thing, that thing, watching all these videos, the next one plays automatically, and you don't ever stop to apply it. And maybe watch a video and then spend the night working on that technique. I think is much more effective than watching 20 videos and not doing any of it.
Yeah, and another thing that I really have to, keep in check, over the past several years, I've gone away from lecture, teaching where I'm using the whiteboard and, I'm doing a lecture and I'm writing. And so then that's it. And so I'm relying on them taking good notes, understanding those notes. For the last several years, I've created more video tutorials of these lessons. And I've realized as I've done these, the more and more I create, it's almost like a video textbook. So instead of reading chapters, the chapters are these video tutorials. But, it's funny because it never would have occurred to me, okay, here's this, 10-minute tutorial or a 5-minute tutorial. And so, I'll give class time sometimes to do that. And I'm walking around the room, and you got to be careful because some of the kids will put the playback speed on like, twice as fast. So they're trying to get through it. It's like, okay, you can do that, but you're defeating the whole point of what this is. And so you need to slow down and you need to take your time and don't, I'm not talking at a pace that's going to be conducive to that. I've also added this year for the first time what I call video study guides. There are a certain amount of questions for each video tutorial that kind of represent the main core of things I want them to understand. And so the idea hopefully is they watch the video and they'll pause it for a second and then go on Ableton and do that, and then unpause it and watch the next part and then go to Ableton. And again, you got to be careful. I mean, I think kids in general are just very task oriented. Let me get these boxes checked. So study guides, they'll go straight to those questions and they'll skim the video for the answers to those questions. It's like, okay, again, that's not the goal of this. The goal of this is for you to really have ownership of this skill because you're in a class to create. And so, the grade in terms of getting all of those answers correct is less important to me than understanding the concepts when you actually do your projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kids will keep it fresh, man. You gotta.
Oh, I know. When they have to read stuff, they go right to the questions and then look for the questions, look for the answers in the reading, and so I try to design questions that will fool them, just to prove the point. And it's like everybody's missing the point now. I'm missing the point. They're missing the point. I like that idea because I'm with you. Like the note-taking, lecturing stuff. I mean, anytime I'm doing that, you got a number of kids that have finished quickly, and then there's another that is still writing. And then since you're not really addressing anyone in particular, just the room, half of them are just somewhere else in their mind. And
Yeah. Well, there's a lot they're dealing with,
Yeah.
in this day and age.
Yeah, it's a lot of like wasted time. So I'm more apt these days too to have the work done in class and just walk around the room and get a good solid
I try
few
to
minutes.
give a balance of that, just because sometimes it's helpful to be able to have them do it, but then ask questions along the way, so I can float around and hover over. Like yesterday was a work day for drum beats, and so before they turned it in, some of them called me over, Mr. Dean, can you hear this beat? And so it was helpful to be able to check it out first, and we talk about the role of the kick or the snare or the hi-hat, and so does what you created reflect that? And that class time to be able to get those intangibles, those nooks and crannies, as opposed to do it all at home, it's due in 2 days, and I hope you get it right. It's flip a coin, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm with you though. I like catching them in the moment so that they don't throw their hands in the air and say, I can't do this.
Yeah.
That's always the danger. Maybe I can ask you like what your ensemble looks like, and that might get us into. I'd love for people to just hear about this presentation you guys did that you sent to me.
Sure.
So what does what does like this modern ensemble look like now?
Well, there's been a couple of different versions of it. It started off, again, not knowing what I don't know, but knowing I wanted to try to have an ensemble that was electronic. I remember literally just Googling electronic music ensemble and just kind of seeing what the different hits were. And I stumbled on a group that's over at Stanford University. The director of that group, Dr. Ge Wang. And I think there are so many different directions you can go with an ensemble that's based off of technology. And so maybe part of that was, like, what I didn't want was, for lack of a better term, like I didn't want an EDM band necessarily. I could do that. I was really looking more for something that felt like it was born out of a classical principle, like, composing, and maybe everything wasn't to a click track, and maybe there wasn't always a drum beat, but that you were still kind of having that thing. So some of the videos that I saw from Stanford were really mind-blowing because, number one, of what they were doing compositionally, it was a pretty wide gamut. But the thing that I really got my attention was the devices they were using. So I know now in hindsight, there were two things that they were doing that really caught my attention. One was the actual speaker. They call it Hemisphere, and so it's a dome, and it's got 6 speakers that point in all directions. So the idea with that is, if you sing or you play the trumpet or a piano, that sound naturally radiates in all directions, whereas an amplifier is very directional, or a speaker is very directional. And so the idea was they wanted electronic sounds to behave acoustically. Take that electronic sound and radiate that in the same way that you would an acoustic sound. So that to me was really compelling.
And this is that device that kind of sits on the floor. It looks like
yeah. So, but I got to be clear because on the video for this Holocaust piece, those are commercial hemispheres. The way we started, Dr. Wang's, his were homemade, and the cool thing was they just look cooler anyway. But he actually published online how to make these. So these Hemisphere speakers are made, and this is seriously heart attack, 10-inch Mandablatt salad bowls from IKEA. They're bamboo salad bowls, and so the whole process of like drilling the holes, getting these 4-inch car speakers, creating an amp system, 6 channels, so you could plug that into an audio interface, and when we got around to doing it. Some of those plans were a little dated, so we couldn't find some of those parts anymore. We had to kind of tweak some of that so it was, available for us. But that was a really cool experience because we had kids who were just taking, like science classes where they were just soldering and working with electronics. And so to have them come in and build these speakers was one piece of it. But then the other piece of it, Dr. Wong wrote this code called Chuck. And so this was his platform for actually creating sounds. So we were learning that. I knew nothing about coding. I happened to have that year some kids who were really into it. So to them, they just took off. But the last piece of that kind of bridged it together was they're called game tracks. So it was a PlayStation golf game. And this device sits on the floor and it's got two gloves attached to strings that kind of rotate on this axis. And so the idea was that when you play this game, it would measure your golf swing by the way that you held your hands. So he hacked this controller in a way that those now became controllers for sound. And through this code, you could actually assign different things. So like, for example, they might have a piece where if you moved your hand over to the right, that was like a bell tone for like E flat. Whether if you moved your hands like in a swirling motion, that created this pad sustained sound for like, a G or an E flat triad or something along those lines. So his performances were very visual. It wasn't just the music. It was like a visual spectacle to see all of this because you had to do that in order to execute the music. So I was just blown away by that. And that was our first version of this ensemble. And so we composed a couple of pieces. One of the kids wrote one for game track. I wrote one, that 17/4 thing where we were using push controllers, Ableton push controllers for that. And so that eventually evolved to what you see in this Holocaust piece where we got a grant, and so we bought some commercially made Hemispheres. They were more powerful. The frequency range was a lot bigger. You could get more bass tones from it. We would always assign 2 players that would also run through a subwoofer. And so those kids were responsible for all the bass stuff, whereas the other parts were like more of the tenor or the alto or the soprano, type stuff that was more upper frequencies. And then from there it was, well, what do we create? In that sense, from the musical standpoint, up until we did this Holocaust piece, everything else was very organic. You just composed a tune. And it was a club that met one day a week after school. So that creative process was very slow. I mean, we'd get to the spring and you had, 2-3 pieces that were prepared. I mean, it took that long because you were, there's no music store to go buy electronic ensemble sheet music. You're writing that from scratch. You're figuring out how you're going to create those sounds from scratch. You're figuring out who you're going to assign. Everything is built from the ground up. And so the amount of time it takes to get all of that orchestrated and then rehearsed, like once you have it learned, like anything else, you're preparing that piece. It takes rehearsals and run-throughs and tweaking along the way. So all of that paved the way for, that was the year. This was 3 years ago. I can't remember what year it was, where Ableton Loop was in LA. Mm-hmm. And I'd always wanted to go to Berlin, but had never been able to go. And I said, I'm not missing this. It's in LA. I'm not missing this. And so I went. And that to me was such a religious experience for me. I mean, I just had no idea what to expect. So one of the workshops was Ali Mobs was doing this thing he called Beat Picnic. And I thought at the time, because I was teaching a music appreciation class as well as other stuff, that, we're going to go into the city with our cell phones and record, dogs barking and, Walking on Leaves, and we'll just take those samples and create like this really cool, goofy, drum rack thing, which to them would have been tons of fun. So we did all of that, but then this was my gateway, unbeknownst to me, to sound design, because he was showing us how you would take that sample of, Walking on Leaves and completely just deconstructing those frequencies. And now that sound is a pad or a bass sound or a kick drum sample or a hi-hat. And I'd never seen that before. I was just completely blown away by it. I had no idea that was possible. And the irony is I had already committed to composing this Holocaust piece before I went to Loop. And in my mind, I was just going to create something the same way I'd done before. But with this whole sound design element, that's where the curiosity to me of trying to have meaning to this. I forget what episode it was, but you had a podcast episode where one of the topics was the perspective of the person who creates this song or track or whatever it is, and then how other people receive it, and do they have the same experience. And so that really hit me, because I have come to terms with the fact that this piece is no one is more connected to this piece than me. I mean, I know from the ground up all of the things I wanted to do to really inject meaning, and it's just impossible to translate all of that to your general garden variety audience. The kids in the group are maybe the second closest who understand that, because they were a part of building it. But going back to how I wanted to look for more meaning, the sound design from field recordings to me was really compelling. And so I thought, boldly, what if all my sounds created came from Holocaust artifacts? We have a museum up in Skokie. It's about 45 minutes north Chicago suburb. And I knew right away, of course they're not going to go for this. As a kid, I was in the youth orchestra, and we did a European trip, and we saw Auschwitz, and I remember the barracks and all of those things. It's a very sensitive thing that you're talking about that involve a lot of people. So, there's a lot of reverence with all of that. So, but nothing ventured, nothing gained, because to me, it was really important to be as true and sincere and as meaningful to the intent of this as absolute possible. And to me, I couldn't find any way to get closer than if every sound you hear came from that place, whatever the artifacts were from all over, Europe. But if those were the main resources for all of that. And so I just called them, and I pitched it. And then I braced myself for the no and the rejection, and they said, "This sounds great." Absolutely. And I was blown away that they said yes. So a colleague of mine at school and I, we went up, and we just spent the morning, couple hours just recording, Jewish menorahs, army soldier boots, Nazi Jeep ornaments, helmets, daggers, whatever they had. And it was, at that point, you had no idea what you were going to use or how you were going to use it. You just wanted to collect as much of it as possible. So I came back with like just hours and hours of all these different samples. And then, because at that point too, I was very new to sound design. And I didn't quite understand all of the tools that you could use. But one thing I knew for sure that I did not want to do, I didn't want to do any sound design using tools that were going to inject, like I didn't want any oscillators or anything that was going to add a tone that wasn't from the actual artifact. I did not want that. And so most of my instruments just came from Simpler. Or putting MIDI effects on that track, reverbs, delays, those kinds of things. But as far as the actual sculpting itself, like maybe there was an erosion effect, or whatever it was. It had to not introduce new things. It could only manipulate what was already existing. And so that journey of trying to explore all of that, and because it was my first time doing it, I screen recorded everything. I remember it was over the Christmas holiday. I was off from work for a couple of weeks. And so I just immersed myself in creating instruments. And so not knowing where this was going to go, I just hit record so that I could always go back and retrace my steps. Once I found a sound I liked, how did I get there? So I have this archive now of like every single sound I created. There's a video of me actually like in that moment going through that. But as far as the kids are concerned and the music, I mean, there are so many layers to that. We based it off of children's poems who were prisoners at Terezin. That's one of the camps that had a larger population of children. And when they liberated the camp, they found stories, they found poems, they found all of these literary things that a lot of those children had created. And so that was the kind of the catalyst of like, how do we set the stage for all of this? I don't know, I can keep going here. Is this kind of where
Oh yeah, it's incredible, fascinating.
Just trying to figure out again, every melody that we built variations on came from the Jewish heritage, whether they were lullabies that were sung by mothers to their children, partisan songs that soldiers in the army sang, religious hymns that are prevalent in Jewish faith. I wanted to have that kind of as the core of the musical content and explore what we could develop in a storyline with all of that. So it's 3 movements. The first movement is based off of a poem that we don't know who wrote it. The poem is called Bird Song. And it's just, to me, it's very innocent. It's just talking about, it seems like whoever wrote this is thinking back to an earlier time before all of this stuff happened. And so, there's a lot of hope, and there's memories of like, fond things, pleasant things. The second movement is based off of a poem that Eva Pikova, she was 12 years old when she was sent to Terezin. The poem that she wrote was called Fear. They don't have the manuscript, but they have a typed out transcript of the poem. That was a much darker piece of work. And the fact that it came from a 12-year-old was really, really profound to me, that someone that young had that amount of clarity to really, set this stage for something that was really visceral. And then the last movement, I wanted to represent the resilience of the people having transcended all of that, the horror of the Holocaust, that did not defeat them. That did not take away. It didn't wipe them off. So this poem, I Am a Jew, that Franta Boss wrote, a lot of pride in his Jewish heritage and his people. And, all of that became the narrative. So that informed a lot of the musical devices. For example, in the second movement, Fear, I wanted to use, I think it's called a cryptogram. So the most famous one is Bach, B-A-C-H. And so you write a 4-note motif off of those letters, B-A-C-H. And so in German, the old system, B was actually B flat, and H was actually B natural. So you had B flat, A, C, and B. And so there's lots of compositions where they're just using those four notes and exploring what you can do. So I wanted to use the word fear in the same way. So the note's F, E, A. And then since there's no note for R, I went to solfege for that. So if we say do, re, re in the key of C would be the note D. So my cryptogram was F, E, A, D. And so in that movement, that's the only thing going on. It's all the different ways I can explore just using those four notes, or those four notes as a key center. So like there's the key of F, and then there's the key of E, and then there's the key of A, and then there's the key of D, with the transpositions of F, E, A, D. I mean, I just wanted to, again, it's a rabbit hole for me, right? I don't expect anybody to understand or hear all of this or appreciate all of this, and they don't have to. But for me, that was just like this thing on my back. Like I felt a very big responsibility not to screw this up and not to, it was very important for me to be as respectful and as diligent as I possibly could. True story about something else that happened that was really unexpected. So all of this was in preparation for the student Holocaust assembly. And so, we performed the piece at that. And it's traditional for the Jewish Student Association to bring in a guest speaker. And so this was no different. Well, in the transition from the first movement to the second movement, there's this letter that was written by a woman by the name of Rennie Valhaus. And this is a letter that was one of the artifacts at the museum. And so this letter is written to her family. She's just found out that she and her son have been transferred to Auschwitz. And she knows what that means. So this is basically her farewell letter. She's writing her family, she's saying a goodbye. So we have that letter read. One of my colleagues, Marianne Zimmel, who teaches German, and she's also Jewish, was really gracious to be a part of this project with me. So we recorded her reading this both in German and in English, and you kind of intertwine the translation of the letter as she's reading it, along with typewriter strikes, which are actually from a typewriter from the museum. And so we start that letter just reading it as you would normally expect it. But as the letter progresses, we begin to degrade the audio signal so that it gets, really crushed and just, distorted. And that is the intro into the second movement. So that part of the piece is really visceral, and it gets really loud. And I remember at that performance, the guest presenter was like, right in the front row. And I was worried that, this volume was going to get, really loud. And I just kind of, just so you know, there's a part where it gets kind of loud. So if you have to cover your ears. But that's a very emotional part of the piece too. And so we did the performance and it went fine. And after the performance is over with, this gentleman comes over to the ensemble and he's telling us, how much he appreciated everything. Well, here's the thing that blew us away. Rennie Valhaus was his aunt. If you think about all of the millions of people that were involved, the odds that we choose as part of this composition a letter written by one person, and that a descendant of that person just coincidentally is chosen as a guest speaker at that same assembly. It was deep.
That gave me chills.
A couple of kids lost it. And then I was worried, I can't even imagine from his point of view, that's a very personal thing that we, just kind of put on display. And, I was worried that,
how might he take that?
I didn't want to, yeah, I didn't want to offend. I didn't want to add more hurt to that, but he was really, really, receptive. And we had gone through a couple of rounds of trying to find the best way to translate this letter. It was written in German. And choosing the words that we thought conveyed the sentiment the best. And so I remember he also told us he's seen several different translations of that letter, and he felt like the one that we came up with was a good choice of, narrative. So yeah, there were just so many levels with that piece, and I could go on and on about it.
Wow. That's an incredible project. And it's really interesting hearing how you've incorporated everything and made it work together, and all of the care and thought you put into every single element. And this is, as you've kind of alluded to, like such a delicate situation. First of all, just the opportunity to go into the museum and to record sounds from this, and then to have to find a way to present it that is effective and respectful and all of these things. I'm really impressed with like the level of detail you went to. And I'm following along. I have the PDFs that you sent, so I can see like the letters and the pictures of these children that wrote the letters. I mean, they're babies, and
They are. And to come up with what they came up with, there's several collections of these. They haven't published. The most well-known publication is a book called "I Never Saw Another Butterfly," and it's got a whole collection. There's several Frontenac poems in there. That to me is what is so mind-blowing. I mean, there are many things mind-blowing, but that to try to imagine, they did this in secret, by the way.
Yeah.
And looking at the manuscript of Frontenac, the I Am a Jew, it's a sheet of paper where he's got other stuff on there too. Side note on that, the fact that the Prague Museum had these and was willing to send me scans of those. I mean, I have this book. I've read them in print, but to actually see a photo scan of Frontenac's handwriting, and that they were so young, that to me, I wanted, as much as I could as an outsider, I wanted this to feel like they were the ones telling this story. Part of the piece has some marching tunes in Yiddish. And so, at the university, there was a Yiddish language class. And so I got in touch with the professor. And in the third movement, we simulate this army coming to liberate the concentration camps, after the Nazis have been defeated. And so there's this gradual build of the marching, which is a soldier boot from Jerry Glass, who was a Chicagoan who liberated Mauthausen. He was one of the soldiers there. But I wanted to record people singing this in Yiddish. And, how do you find that many people? And so that also was a lesson for me in just learning how to process sound. So I remember it was two different groups. It was this Yiddish class, like four students. And we just sang it over and over and over. And I recorded 20 takes. Because to record it once and just copy and paste it is just a louder, recording of like four people, right? I wanted the sound of a chorus. And so I wanted them, because you're not going to sing it the same way every time. And then there was another Yiddish vocal ensemble that was not a part of the campus thing. It was part of a synagogue. And so I learned who they were and introduced myself, and I went out to their rehearsal and recorded them multiple takes. And so, to layer all of that, it was cool to be able to, but I learned a little bit of Yiddish in that, experience. I mean, the translation of what these words mean and why that was meaningful as a partisan song from, the soldiers who were part of all that. I mean, again, like so many layers of things that I personally was able to experience that I'll never be able to fully explain to others. But at least everyone seems to have gotten something meaningful from it, which is, what the goal was. And there's been a ripple effect. People have asked questions about it, after, and I'm happy to explain or enlighten.
I love how you've incorporated so many different disciplines at the school and organizations to get this real authentic voice going. And even just, you're doing some cool interdisciplinary stuff at the school, having the kids making the speakers for you so that they're part of it. And this is something that education needs sorely, is this real world activity where the stuff they're doing becomes something. It's not just the thing you hand into the teacher and then you look at the grade and you throw in the garbage. So
Right.
much of school is that, which I think is where the disconnect often is. But the best learning experiences are when this all comes together for something. And this is, one of the best examples I've ever seen of that kind of work.
I appreciate that. I didn't know where I was going with it, or where it would end up. And I remember the assembly, it was in April or early May. And the timing of it coincidentally, so we do this event with our digital music classes. They spend all year learning these things, and they create, a track, whatever genre they want to do it in. And so we have a showcase, and I call it Digimuse. And so that's an evening where, one at a time they get on stage and they talk about what they created, the inspiration behind it, what they learned. And so then we actually project their Ableton file on this huge screen so that people not only hear the song. I think if we just played the recording, it's easy to be dismissive because, it's a trap tune or it's a hip hop tune or it's a rock tune. And how many times have you heard that before? But to actually see what that looks like as that MIDI data and audio samples scroll across the screen and the automation lanes, I feel like it's a opportunity to kind of enlighten the community on okay, this song they're going to play for you is 5 minutes long. And that took 500 hours of work. And now they understand what goes into that trivial hit that they listen to in their own, So all of that was part of this whole experience. And coincidentally, that was the night before the Holocaust Assembly. So we premiered it at Digimuse. And then the very next day, we played it during the school day for the student body. So, all of that leading up. And I remember feeling pressure. I didn't really talk about it much to people, but I had already committed to this. And I was doing it for the first time. And I had no idea what direction it would go in. I had no idea how much time it would really take to prepare all that and put it together. I definitely didn't want to botch it. I didn't want to have some thing that we kind of, slop together. So, grace of God, all of that worked out in a way that we had really ample time to rehearse it once it was completed, and the collaboration with the kids, in terms of all of that. But I remember that winter break, I was just like, I need to do this well. And, now I don't have this, I can just take, however much time I want, and when I have it ready, then say, hey, I'll do this thing. I had already, committed to all of that. So yeah, thankfully it all worked out.
Yeah, I could see how this is a higher stakes type of thing. Yeah, you don't want to, this has to be good. It has to be done right. Yeah, I can imagine that's a ton of pressure. You really have a lot of very interesting, just creative exercises in here too. so often I find limitations and boundaries are the things that get the work done. And you've got, you alluded to a few of them, like the cryptogram method of coming up with like your note choices, for instance, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And I love how you were able to make it all not, it's just such a great blend of like creative exercises. If we just talk about them as creative exercises on their own, they're great. But the way that they also have this like philosophical tie-in with the subject matter it's really impressive. And it's such there's a lot to learn, I think, on so many levels here, as far as just teaching, as far as coming up with your own ways of making music, and then bringing it in. We do a project. It's just a weekly assignment we do in our Berkeley class, where the students, it's a sampling class, so they have to take 3 samples and make a piece with them and combine them together. One of them is some kind of speech. Then they take something important from their life. I forget exactly the third one, but there's 3, and the idea is to understand how things affect each other. So there's sort of like a responsibility, right, when you are sampling, especially like things that have to do with cultures and histories. Like if you take a presidential speech and put like very serious music to it, it has this weight, like long, deep notes. If you put, carnival music to it, it changes it completely.
For sure.
So the idea is to recognize the impact everything has as it interacts, which I guess is so... I didn't think of it this way till just now, but that's how music is, right? Like, my guitar playing changes drastically if you come in with your trumpet, and the interplay is now so different.
Absolutely. And I think for me, one of the things that was an added layer to this is that, I'm not Jewish. I am very removed from a lot of that culture, just, from my own life experience. Whereas as a black man, and this is one of the projects I'd like to, do at some point in the future too, if I had composed a piece on the black experience, like one of my, springboard ideas, there's a museum all dedicated to the lynching of blacks in America. And so, there's inspiration there to try to tell that story in a similar way, so approaching that museum and saying, look, this is an example of something I've done before, I would like to do. But if I tell that narrative as a black person, okay, so it's easier for me to come into that space as opposed to what it was like as a non-Jewish person. To try to really represent somebody's culture that I don't identify with, and understanding, the very sensitive things that could imply. Again, that was something that was just very present in my mind at every step of the way, is that I am the last person that would have any connection to any of this, but that story to me is so compelling. And I think that story transcends, Jewish culture. I don't think it's just a Jewish thing, because it's affected so many people in so many ways.
Yeah, it's a human event.
It is a human event. And it's also, different cultures with their own experiences of oppression. There's that shared, bond that becomes implied, and, how are each of us navigating, processing all of that decades later. And so, super learning experience for me, even now. It's funny because in preparing for this, podcast that we're doing, last week, I just kind of, took a look at it, and I hadn't looked at it in quite some time. And I think it was good to just have fresh eyes on it, that I was able to kind of put it away for a while and see it in a way that maybe is a little, I'm not quite sure how to describe it. But it was like time travel. I'm immediately transported back to what I was thinking and how I was feeling as I was trying to gather all these things and start this process. And then I listened to the recording the other day, and it's the first time I'd listened to that performance from top to bottom. And again, just the time travel of like what those rehearsals were like. But the kids, man, I mean, this wasn't an ensemble with, Jewish students. It was just whoever in the school had an interest in being the electronic ensemble, and they were part of this group. And for all of them to be so open-minded about this, and the learning experience that each of them got through, this experience, that to me, that whole, I think out of all the years I've had this ensemble, that year was the one where the bond was maybe the strongest. At one point we did a performance at the museum. We got invited to perform this piece at the Skokie Museum. They had an event in the evening. It was the Anne Frank event. And like kids, man, I mean, these are teenagers. What all this looks like through their lens, and what kind of ripple effect does this have for them moving forward when they're in their garden variety history classes learning about events in the world? Who knows? Because I haven't explored any of that. It would be really cool at some point to circle back and see, what kind of a ripple effect that had.
I'm sure it does. We teach, in English, there's a book we teach, Night by Elie Wiesel, who, it's his experience in the Holocaust, in the camps. And to teach that, it's, again, it's like delicate material, of course. But one of the lessons, and one of the things Elie Wiesel always spoke about, was how I forget the exact way he put it, but basically an injustice against one person is an injustice against every person. And it translates on a lot of levels to just everyday activities, where I think he may have also had a quote in there about how silence only helps the oppressor. So at school, if you're watching the big kid beat up the little kid for the lunch money and you don't do anything,
That's right. That's right.
You're not really an innocent bystander.
That's right.
You're allowing this to happen. You're helping the oppressor. Tomorrow it could be your friend. Tomorrow it could be you.
That's right.
And it's a powerful message that needs to be understood, and it's it can be pretty effective. I haven't ever taught this, and we do a lot of film, because words are effective, but the visuals are another story. And it's always powerful. It's always a pin drop, situation in the classroom. They relate to it, even whether or not they have the background. It's striking. And I love that you went into that world and explored it. I mean, I think, honestly, it takes some bravery on your part, to go in and take this on. And I love that the community was so open and helpful to you and welcomed you to tell the story and to be part of it.
It's interesting that you say that, because one of the members of that university Yiddish language class who sang on, the recordings that I was making, was also a reporter for the university paper. And somewhere later on after that, we were at the point where we were doing rehearsals and run-throughs. It was getting pretty close to the date for the show. He wanted to interview me and the kids, and do this piece about it. And it was interesting, because I think I had just been so caught up in, creating it and being sensitive to it. But then this is the thing that it was intangible that I did not think about. And, it's just, it is what it is. I'm also an ensemble director. And so no matter what the piece of music is, the rehearsal is the rehearsal. We have notes and rhythms that we're trying to organize and prepare in a way that when, the event comes, we execute that in a meaningful way. I mean, these kids had been attached to this piece. When we came back from winter break, so it was January, so 4 months, they'd been attached to this thing for 4 months. It's not like in 4 months at every one of those meetings and rehearsals, you can have this, I don't know how to describe it, like this, somber reverence, thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's rehearsal. I mean, whether we're doing, a 12-bar blues, or this piece, or, and so when he came to that rehearsal, because part of it was he was giving me a fresh pair of ears as an audience member to just see how things were and, were we still needing to tweak things. Well, kids were being kids at that rehearsal. I mean, they're just kids. And so, at various points, they were laughing, cutting up, joking around with each other. None of it, with the music, they weren't
right.
joking about any. They were just being teenagers. Mm-hmm. And then when he wrote the piece, it was interesting because in some ways it was a little critical. And he, as a Jewish person, was just kind of reflecting in his article about how some of that he took issue with. And it was kind of a pinprick for me because my knee jerk was to go right to like defending, hey, wait, you have the wrong idea about this. It's not, they're not blowing this off. This is just a rehearsal for a piece of music that reflects 4 months of work. I mean, if you come in and you're depressed every time you're trying to do this run, you know what I mean? Like no. That kind of vibe. It's like, there was one time as a college kid, we were playing, a wind ensemble piece that was based off of Rosa Parks. And the very end of the piece, there was this French horn solo for the melody "We Shall Overcome," and normally the principal horn player played that solo. One of my white bandmates, and I remember asking the conductor that day, because the day that concert fell on was like a symbolic thing for like whatever that was. I don't remember what it was, but I said, would it be okay if I played it this time? And he's like, absolutely. And it's the simplest melody. It's only, like 3 or 4 pitches. And I remember when it came up, I choked and I completely botched that solo because I became so emotional to what those notes represented. And in hindsight, I should have never done that. Or I should have known going into it, in order for me to convey this emotion, I have to be emotionless. It's like, actors, portraying, if they actually are feeling that, sometimes that will ruin and so, it's unfair to ask these teenagers to comprehend all of this in a rehearsal context. So anyway, I remember, I had read the article and it was just irritating me. And I remember months later, I sought him out and I said, look, can I talk to you? Because this has just been eating away at me. And it was great to have that conversation because he gave me more perspective on where he was coming from. He didn't mean for it to be critical. He was just reflecting back some things that were fair from a, snapshot perspective, not taking into account everything he wasn't privy to. But then to also hear me trying to kind of enlighten and give perspective to all of that. I was really glad we had that conversation because I didn't want him leaving being resentful that we had done something disrespectful to his heritage and culture. And I didn't want him diminishing all of the work and the investment that these kids had put into, you know, preparing this piece of music. So that was the one blip out of all of this that was a little bit of a stain. Everything else had been overwhelmingly, you know, positive. But I think that was another good lesson to have.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're kids, right? You know, like they're coming into class, they're having their day, they're doing whatever, and they play music. So to have that kind of somber tone the whole time is exhausting. I know from teaching literature, you know, we often deal with heavy topics, and sometimes you need a break. Sometimes you do need levity. It's not at the expense of it, but it's important. We do night with. So I teach, one of the classes I teach is with they call it the E&L class. It's the English New Language Learner classes. So immigrants from all over the place, different levels of understanding English, some interrupted education. And the woman I teach it with is from Israel. And we came across, I forget how it came up, but the Holocaust came up, and a majority of the class hadn't heard about it. Wow. They didn't know what it was. And for a whole host of reasons, you know, interrupted education, and, you know, some of the situations kids are coming from, like, you know, the fact that they're there is amazing. So we said, you know, we have to talk about this. And that comes up all the time in this class, these cultural things like that they haven't come across yet. Like, we derail our lessons every day to cover these things. So we had to do the whole unit on it, because there's no way you can be, you know, a teenager in high school without being aware of this. And even her, you know, as a Jew, as somebody that's very closely connected to it, has had family involved, she needs to take a break. You need to step away from it. So I get that, and we're understanding of the kids too, that they do have a respect for it, and they have. I think it's impossible really for anyone to understand truly, but
sure,
to have that every day is rough. So I can understand where you're coming from with that completely, you know, in working with.
And I think part of it too was that they were at the point where they knew the piece. You know, once you've learned your part and you've played your part and you feel like you're really confident with your part, like, then you're just executing that. And so those run-throughs were more about like clinical executions. You know, I mean, I think the emotion was built into the writing. There wasn't like, you know, velocity sensitive keys where if you pressed in a little bit more, you were getting more of a swell, or, you know, all of those, like, all of that was not really where it was coming from. And so what they physically had to do on their part to execute that was the same every time. It was more about just making sure that the timing, you know, every time we played it, there was a focus. And I think that was part of it too. It was like, you know, where's their head? Their head is not necessarily on Rennie Valhas or Franta Bass. It's, you know, letter C, I can't miss this cue. I'm the one triggering this sample for the army. You know what I'm saying? Like, all of those kinds of things in the script become, because we talk about it all the time, they have a responsibility as performers. And you don't always get to be a performer and experience it the same way the audience does, because that sometimes derails your ability to provide that experience. You know, we are able to get that experience in rehearsal because it's just us in the room. And if we've rehearsed it enough to where we feel like we can just do it, but the audience gets one shot at that. And so there are so many things that they have to be mindful of in order to, you know, properly and respectfully deliver that experience, You know, your head as a performer is not always into that moment at that time. So it's a very, you know, again, one of those intangibles that I don't think the average concert goer realizes when you are, you know, taking in an actual performance.
Yeah. I kind of spoke about something similar on the last episode with Bill Small, talking about like the emotion and telling the story of a song. And in playing with my band, we've worked on some songs recently, and we're playing them, but now we're playing them like on a technical level, like where I'm not even thinking about the story of the song. Even the words are coming out of my mouth, but I'm not in the song. So, you know, I'm thinking about like, am I hitting with the kick drum properly? Am I, you know, whatever, is my guitar too loud, too much distortion or something?
Sure.
And then after speaking with him, actually, we had another band practice the other night, and I made a conscious effort to go back into the storytelling part of it. And it was a totally different experience. You know, instead of singing the notes, I was singing the feeling of it. You know, so.
Now, what was that like for you? Was it more challenging, harder? Was it like a less, like, which way did that go for you when we had to go in that space?
Well, it was easier in a way, because the technical stuff had been worked on more.
Okay.
Yeah, because like we were having a practice, we were doing like harmonies and stuff, and I was saying, you know, we're like singing the note. We're not singing. We need the feeling. This part needs the feeling more than the note, kind of thing. We're just hitting notes right now. So in playing, getting all that technical stuff, then when it was kind of like go back to the story mindset, I was almost further in it, because now I'm not thinking as much about like, am I hitting the guitar in the right spot with the kick drum? Because I know I am, because we worked on it.
Yeah. Right.
So it's like, as you make the song, you're really in it, and then you pull back to get like technical about it, and then you come back into it. And it sounds like at that time of the year, that was exactly where you were in the technical place.
I think they were also seeing, you know, so we did 3 performances of that. We did the one at Digimuse, we did the one at the Holocaust Assembly, and then we did one at the Skokie Museum. And they were all relatively, I mean, that was, you know, the school year was about to wrap. I mean, we were done in June. So I think they were seeing the end of the tunnel coming up, and all of that was culminating. You know, one of the things I noticed with all of my groups when we're preparing for performances, the closer you get to that date, the focus just becomes a lot more intent. And you know, they understand, okay, all this time that, you know, I think at one point we actually clocked the hours. We added up the amount of time in minutes and seconds and hours that we've actually spent preparing this, so that we could see how enormous all of that was, because I think the total piece was 12 minutes, whatever it is, however long it is. And, you know, I'm one tiny piece of the pie in their world. You know, they've got English and math and science and whatever else, and whatever final exams and major projects. And so, you know, getting hungrier just for summer break because you can just have a vacation from everything. Who knows what was going through their minds as they were going through all of that. I know for me, at every performance, and I know this because I'm very, you know, aware of it, during each of those 3 performances, I could see it in their faces. They were really plugged in, and they were in that space because they understood what they were representing. And again, for an adolescent to, you know, be able to do that, I just have so much respect for. I mean, I wasn't doing anything that complex when I was their age. I mean, I was pretty cerebral, and, you know, I knew I wanted to do music, and I was serious about that and focused about it, but like nothing to this extent, you know. And place like Lab, you know, there's some academic rigor. It's got a reputation for being, you know, a really good preparatory school for the next chapter in your life, getting you ready for, you know, life after graduation with, you know, your careers and colleges. And so, you know, all of that is a package deal for these kids. And, you know, this wasn't a class. This was an after school thing. They were just, you know, in addition to their full 8-hour day, oh yeah, I'm going to come over and camp out over here for a couple of hours every week and, you know, hash through this thing and bang this out. So yeah, all of that to me was like, you know, there's so many intangibles that you don't expect anyone to really appreciate. How could they? But as long as everybody is appreciative, you know, the other piece of this was, I mean, that piece is very avant-garde, you know, so what is the average listener going to take away from that regard? I mean, you know, I can tell you the story and tell you what, you know, the intent is, but then when you hear it, you know, I mean, some of that stuff is tonal, but some of it's not, and some of it's very visceral, and it's meant to be 100% like whatever musical device I need to get this thought across or express this sentiment. That's the only thing that I'm concerned with. I'm not concerned about this being, you know, this pleasant major chord progression or this minor chord progression or this sense of rhythm. You know, I don't care about any of that. If any of that finds its way into the movements, that's great. But my number one goal above all of that was expressing a sentiment through the lens of trying to be creative with music technology. You know, I could have written that for a string quartet, you know, or a brass choir. But, you know, again, we wanted, the whole premise of that group is to try to explore new ways that we can express ourselves musically, have a meaningful experience through community, you know, as an ensemble, because we are responding to each other's parts constantly. There are just a million layers to all of that.
It's cutting edge, really, because all of these sounds are made with artifacts, real thing, and you know, when you, especially when you look through some of the visuals, look at these letters, look at these photographs. It's very real in a way I don't think you can get with a string quartet, because those are instruments, they could play anything. But this is,
it's timeless.
Yeah, and this is like, when has this been done before? Something like this. Like I think, in all honesty, when I first saw this, and especially now talking to you and understanding how deep it really goes, like, this is a really forward-thinking, pushing the envelope piece of music. It's on so many levels, especially as far as like what an ensemble can be considered, what you can do with music technology, how you can express these sentiments and preserve history. I can't think of anything else like it. I think it should be in the textbooks, if I'm being honest with you.
Well, I could tell you there wasn't anything for me to, you know, in looking for a model to try to figure out a template, you know, that didn't exist. But I think thankfully it didn't have to be, you know, it was liberating with all the people I've met who are in this industry of, you know, music production. Which, by the way, at least for me, has been really, really incredible. I've just been blown away by how gracious the members of this music production community are in general, how generous they are with their time, how willing they are to share ideas and techniques and approaches that they've used so freely without asking anything in return. And I think as I'm thinking about this now, probably subconsciously, that is what was liberating for me in trying to just choose my own path to create this. I didn't feel like I needed to do it a certain way because so many people have just gone their own individual path, and they're all different. So like I referenced Kwang Vu a while back. I'm on this Kwang Vu kick right now. So especially the trio that's got so trumpet, bass, and drums. So no piano, no guitar. And especially the recordings that have Stomu Takeshi as bass player, because that guy is like on a whole other planet. But I remember when one of my friends first turned me on to the first recording I heard was this live in Bremen, 2003. And it really is an acquired taste. It's very avant-garde. And I remember liking a couple of the songs, but never really going through the whole album straight through because at some point I would just kind of lose interest. And I've revisited all of that, and now it's like the most beautiful music from start to finish. And I, am realizing how liberating that is with the communication that those three guys have on all those records of letting this music experience unfold without trying to follow somebody else's template. I don't know any other, at least I've not heard yet, any other example of a group of musical performances like that trio, that I can say, oh, that sounds like so-and-so, or that sounds like so-and-so. And so, not necessarily trying to be different, but just trying to figure out where your calling is, on what direction this music is going to take you, and where your own buy-in is, I think is at least what drove me. And at the end of the day, if I felt bought into it, then that was enough for me, because there was already something that I wanted to express. And if I feel like I got that out, there was something liberating about being able to have those feelings and have a vessel for them to, leave. And then everything else to me was gravy. If I could get buy-in from other people, if I felt like it was something that was, palatable, was it too weird that no one could relate? Fine. I'm disappointed in that, but I guess, okay. And to be fair, each of these three performances, we always, there's like a little behind the scenes little documentary. We'd always play that first. We didn't just play the piece. At least from that standpoint, we did want to give the audience a sense of like, here's a little glimpse on like the making of all of this. So it's got, as you've seen, me going to the museum and recording artifacts, and you hear interviews from the students and from the people I collaborated with, telling their story, so that at least if you don't have an ear for something a little more avant-garde, maybe you're a little more open to that, because you can get more of a, I guess one way to translate that is, I remember once I began to watch interviews of Kwang Vu talking about his music and articulating where he's coming from and where he's trying to go, it informed how I heard his music, because I had a glimpse on what he was trying to represent. And, there was respect that was garnered from that. So maybe that was a way to just try to garner understanding and appreciation from the audience before we actually played the piece from top to bottom. And, maybe that helped. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think it does help. I mean, for me, I looked at it first and got an idea of what it was. It's a lot to just take in, without sometimes you need that, right? Like you need just a little explanation.
Yeah, you do.
Of this is what we're getting here.
You do.
And I'm really happy to hear you go through all the details of it. And I get a feeling that you're really only scratching the surface with me too. It's incredible what's gone into this. But I can't, help but like go back to, this is why we all do it, is the students, right? I mean, what kind of impact this must have had, just if we're just even thinking about it from the perspective of their understanding of the Holocaust and the human suffering, and to make, I don't know how you could make this more tangible for them, because it's one of those topics that can be so, anything historical, right? It can just seem like almost make believe, like, not in that it didn't happen way, but like just you're so far removed from it, and that's always the challenge of having us really deeply understand things that our collective humans have been through.
I was blown away that this was the first school that I've ever taught at that had this kind of an assembly. They do it every other year, and the fact that they do it at all, so we have student assemblies once a week for various topics involving various grade levels, and so we do a MLK every year, and we do a Holocaust Remembrance every other year. And I remember just being blown away by that. But I think it was because had I not gone and visited Auschwitz when I was in high school, I might have been just as disconnected as the next person.
Yeah.
Like when you're an adolescent and your brain isn't fully developed yet, and the Holocaust is one chapter in a whole bunch of other chapters that you're responsible for demonstrating mastery and getting your grades so you can move on to the next, like all of that stuff can really pollute the real intent of what that study is supposed to provide. And I think for me, it was already skewed in a positive way because I had a frame of reference, but other schools don't have that. I remember at one of the schools I taught at in Texas, it was a junior high. They had a Holocaust survivor come and talk to the kids. And it was so embarrassing for me because those kids did not understand any of it. All they were concerned about was, it was like a movie script of, something that was tragic that, was just kind of like entertaining. And I'm looking at this person sitting on stage, like this person, like, he is so bearing his soul right now to a bunch of kids who just don't get it. And I remember just really feeling embarrassed for him. But I think in general, this is an exception to the rule, to be sure. The fact that we have a dedicated assembly that's produced by the student body. This is all student, produced. And it represents a really wide gamut. Like, it's not just the Jewish Association. It's kids from the Latino student group, from the African American student group. Like, so many people have a piece in this assembly where they're all trying to show that there are things that transcend and apply to more than just one group of people, and trying to build unity by reflecting all of that. But you're right. It's when kids have no idea that this is a thing, and even if they do know it's a thing, do they really understand the depth and the gravity of the thing? And how do you as a teacher, I mean, a lot of that depends on your understanding of that thing, because you're the vessel that puts that knowledge out there. So the fact that, and we have a Holocaust class. One of the offerings in the history department is students as an elective can choose a class that centers on the Holocaust. I mean, that's unheard of. I've never heard of that anywhere else.
Yeah, that's cool. And I love that it's student run. You get that buy-in, that investment, like, in it. Mm-hmm. And even from, I'm sure, their peers too, because this is Bobby's assembly, this is one he's working on. That's got to matter. But yeah, like, being a high school kid, I don't envy them when I see them.
Me neither, man.
You're so wrapped up in that world. When you're in ninth grade and you're 14 years old and you got to go through 4 years at this place, 4 years is like 30% of your life so far.
That's right.
I've done 4 years many times now, so I know I've done it and I can make it through it. But when I'm 14, I don't know if I can make it. And everything is around like your social life. Everything is in the school. Your whole world is kind of centered around that. It's very easy to get a small world sensation. That my problems are unique to me. And nobody out there I can't relate to anybody. They can't relate to me. And you get, very like a narrow view of the world easily.
These kids can get wound up pretty tight because everything is now so immediate, with the social media stuff and just
all
everything
of us
that they're just fire hosed with. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this type of work I think is important because everything is so disposable and short attention span based. To have like this like long project that you spend the whole year doing, that you really get in deep with, that they're invested in, it's important to them now.
I wondered as I was doing each of these these concerts every year that we have this ensemble, if any of this music was recyclable, like later on down the line you would perform this again. And it's weird for me because no matter what the piece was or the subject matter, it does feel like it's a one-off. It's hard for me to envision doing it again because it would be so absent of like the creative process that was part of the thing. Now it's all pre-made. You have new students who weren't a part of any of that, and they're literally looking at that through a clinical lens of, okay, here are these notes and rhythms. And sure, there's a story behind it and you can explain all of that, but I've never actually considered whether or not I'd revisit any of these ever again, because of everything that kind of went into it.
Music. It's just another piece of sheet music on some level.
Especially the years where they compose a piece. And one of the things that was so tragic, the year before last, where we started the school year in person, but then COVID hit and we went remote in March. The kids in that year's ensemble were composing on their own, like collaboratively.
They got cut off.
And they got completely cut off. And it was at a point where a lot of those ideas were just now becoming realized. They hadn't quite tweaked them all yet, but their overarching thing was they were doing I can't remember it was based off of a literary work, the hero's story, something about the various levels that this person goes through, and however many there were too many to do, like, I don't know, 37 different things. So I said, put them in groups and come up with like a theme that represents those groups. And so they narrowed it down to, I think, like either 3 or 5 movements, but they'd done all this work, like creating all the, parts, and none of that got realized. I mean, and those kids are graduated now. They're all gone. So yeah, it's just a weird thing that, that particular kind of group is a very in the moment kind of thing. It's like whatever happens is really geared towards that group during that time, because at least the way that we're doing these kinds of compositions, it's hard to revisit that.
I agree. It's a shame on a lot of levels. It's a shame. But I think you could probably use it as like a template for the future, or to show the videos to the next group, like, hey, this is what we did. And I think it's important that you went through the process too. Like you were figuring it out. You were going through this creative process of gathering materials, talking to people, so that you're leading by example, for one, which is the best way to teach a lot of times, and you're all going through this process together. I think that makes the class unique every year, and that's probably what'll make it stand out in their minds. That, oh, we were the class that did this. That was.
I
like
do.
our
I have
thing.
fond memories of each group that did each particular year, and they're all very different from each other. The skill sets they all brought in, the personalities,
Yeah.
what that particular piece was kind of centered around in terms of like, creative merit. They're all so unique. It's interesting that you put it that way, because as I'm thinking about it,
It would almost be, I don't think anyone would get as much out of it.
I don't think so either. At least the way it's designed now. And I don't want to. I don't want to
kind of hate
diminish,
because it's so amazing. It
should be. Once you have that experience, and it's such a high level of like, return. And I don't want to diminish other groups that are very different in their approach. Like, I know several colleagues who run ensembles that are more jam session, structured. And so something like that, I think, lends itself to really be able to do a lot, and every time you do it, it can be a different group of people or a different experience. And that's not off the table for me in terms of like future ideas, but I'm really enjoying the fact that I came up with a response to the older version of me who was very dismissive about the community from a group of electronic musicians. That to me, I think, is something I'm really enjoying, and so now for me, the next level of this, which is not so much electronic ensemble related per se, but it could be, is like this live performer stuff. So like, acoustic instruments, running them through effects and, loop machines and delays and reverbs and, all of that kind of thing. Like, what kind of chapter might that provide later? All of that to me is like, in the mix, and just trying to find the right moment that you're going to choose that particular project with that group of kids and see where that goes. I like the fact that it's all an option and I can get to it when I get to it. So right now, you're right. I think the one-offs, because each one of them has been really, really meaningful, you kind of want to be able to do that again and experience it again. And you can't, at least in that way, but you can make another one.
Yeah. And it might matter, like, who's in your class. It could be, I think, the first stage of the project. What do you guys want to do? Here's stuff we've done. What's important to you?
That's right.
That's amazing. And for me personally, very inspiring. There's the school year is like a big sine wave, you know. There's times when it feels great. The kid comes in, this is my favorite class. Thank you for teaching me this. That happens like once, and then there's the valleys where you're like, oh man, does this matter? Like, no one looks any smarter when they leave the room. I don't know that I'm, it's just the nature of the job, I think. But talking to you, like, gives me hope that there are like bigger things, there's greater things you can do. And
I love that you called school a sine wave. That's like such a beautiful way to represent that, because it's so true. It's so true. And you know what's
sometimes
what's hard
square too. It's just complete drop.
Yeah, or saw, like any of those could be fair game to represent any given year. And every once in a while, it'll be several years later, and I'll get a random card from a student, or a random email, or a random letter. I mean, they've been gone, for years. And whatever it was about our time together compelled them to, share. And I appreciate that, because you always wonder, You know, I don't need
Mm-hmm.
accolades. I just want to understand what kind of impact I'm making, even if it's negative. I want to understand where that disconnect might have been, so I can say, well, is that something that's, you know, on me to tweak, or is that something that they need to kind of develop, or is it a combination of both? But when somebody tells me that they really had something meaningful, I'm thinking about one of my jazz guitarists from when I first started teaching at Lab. Years later, he just really sent me a very meaningful note, that because he's really quiet during our time together, and so he was hard to read. You know, I didn't quite know how much of this was connecting with him, and that to me gives me the fuel I need, because you don't get it, as you know, you don't get it very often, but all you need is one, and you get a little energy from that, and it's like, okay, there's hope. I can keep going, you know?
Yeah. I think those are the moments you have to hold on to. You know, teaching is a weird job, and you don't see
It is.
your work done at the end of the day. You know,
That's right.
If I cut the grass is now short. I did that. Look, you don't get that in the classroom. No. But once in a while, you get something that's, you know, much bigger than short grass.
That's right.
So you have to hold on to those moments and remember them. Keep that card. Save those emails.
Absolutely.
You know,
I keep them all.
Yeah. It's really great talking to you, man. I've kept you a long time, and you've shared so much. I love what you're doing. I think it's incredible. It's next level, you know, as music education. And you're not even just doing music education at this point. You're really doing a much deeper service. And I'm sure your students, whether they send you that email or not, are moved and changed in some way. And I can tell you, as, you know, a fellow educator, I'm inspired by what you do.
Well, not to make this mutual admiration society, but I don't get as much of an opportunity to meet, you know, contemporaries who kind of aren't in my local circle. And I've really admired your work from afar. I don't remember my gateway into, well, I think it was somewhere along the lines when you were making the transition from the aphrodisiac thing to Brian Funk. I remember there was a specific episode where you were kind of breaking that down. But there's like this calm and peace about your podcast, where I think it's very accessible to people who are curious, who have an interest in trying to learn more about that world. I think it's a real human element that you bring, no matter what the topic is. And, you know, following you on social media, the stuff that you freely distribute to people in terms of resources. Again, like, this whole community to me has been, that to me is really one of the biggest, you know, highs for me. I mean, besides the activity itself, the people behind this activity, and that you have, you know, this show that you've had so many episodes and no sign of slowing down. I appreciate being able to hang out with you and meet you a little bit more and learn more about the English side of things, right? Because, you know, most of what you, your lens, our lens through you is through the production side of it. But as a fellow educator who can relate to some of the stuff that we have to deal with in the classroom, trying to get kids where they need to be, that's just great, man. I really had a great time hanging out with you today. Thanks so much.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I'm glad you, the name change thing, and, you know, because that was kind of a moment for me too, where I kind of like allowed the worlds to collide a little bit.
Sure.
And as I said to you right in the beginning, I always like the story of how the paths take us to where we wind up. And I never saw that in my own self. I saw, I'm doing music and I'm teaching, that's my job, and this is my, you know, so they were separate. But I started finding myself doing similar things in both places. And I'm like, oh, you know, it just kind of naturally happened. So I feel much more at ease in both, you know, as I've just kind of allowed instead of forcing myself to be two separate people, to just
Sure.
be a unified one.
Well, plus having a last name like Funk, I mean, how can you not dig that, man?
Yeah, well, everything takes a little getting used to, I guess. But yeah, I had a great time talking to you. We'll have to touch base again. There's tons we can talk about, and I would definitely love to hear what you're up to next, because I'm sure it's going to be pretty cool.
Had a great time. Thanks so much for having me.
Can I send people anywhere to check out your work? Is there a spot we can announce on the air here?
I don't really have a page per se. It's really just kind of links to, some of these materials. Trying to explore if there's an actual school space that is appropriate for stuff like this to kind of reside. But at the moment, it's just kind of word of mouth and organic. So through any of those channels, I'm freely distribute any of this to anybody who has an interest, just to check stuff out.
Okay.
Email, too. I mean, email or, those channels in terms of like just asking more questions about it or sharing stuff, right? One thing that would be really cool is if, some of your listeners are doing this on their own and trying to find out what their spin on their, whether it's through a school context or just an organic, electronic, ensemble type of thing. I'm always hungry to learn what other people are doing. So to have that kind of community in an organic way would be cool too, however that becomes possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we'll definitely put some links to some of the materials for the show, and maybe a way to reach you as well, if people like, for sure, if you want to do that.
Totally.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to try to get you in touch with some people too. The Ableton people, and there's a whole educational community, in Ableton in the classroom type of thing, which you might already be very deeply involved in.
Yeah, I'm pretty connected with them, and I've really enjoyed and appreciated that relationship as well. Thomas knows about this project, and again, like I said, we were talking about even transcending the tool beyond the obvious, production stuff. Like, what other ways can other people find benefit from all that? So again, that whole education component of Ableton has really been a godsend to me. You have other companies that are just focused on, the regular consumer, and, tech support, if you can get it, is really the only outlet you get. And so you're going through YouTube channels and, video tutorial sites, whereas there's a whole growing division of Ableton that's specifically geared towards the stuff in schools. And how could you not start to try to invest in those kids at that stage in their life? Because as I've said before, they're doing it anyway. Part of the reason why I feel like I'm blessed that we even have a class that we offer 2 levels of production. We have an intro course, and we have one that we call specializations, like an advanced level course where they can take those skills and go somewhere else. Film scoring, sound design, video game, whatever. But the fact that we can do that, these kids are doing it anyway. So the ability to kind of give them some guidance and some structure, and I can learn along with them and learn from them, that to me is just huge. And so the good forward thinking that Ableton has had to make that available, again, I'm not employed by the company, but I will sing their praises anytime I get the chance, because it's really impacted my work.
Yeah. And I think your work is impacting lots of people.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Well, great. We'll call it a wrap then. And I want to thank everyone for listening. Definitely check out the show notes on this one. It's incredible work. I don't know how else to put it, but I think it's really a look into the future of what education and even just ensemble performances can be. So thanks for listening. And thank you, Francisco. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.